3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning indeed to you. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I occasionally have a bit of a conundrum, or a quandary, rather, at the very top of the show, because some people start texting and tweeting me before I've actually started speaking, and occasionally they say something that's so good I think I might open the show with it. And then I have this internal dialogue about whether or not I should pass it off as my own work, or should I actually credit whoever sent it in with the words that I then ever so slightly reassemble in order to say something that sounds clever. And the fact that I've now coughed to that quandary means that I'm going to have to give Samin Nuneaton some credit for greeting me as I just sat down a moment ago with the words, "I was wondering whether yesterday's events mean that Liz Truss has now officially joined the anti-growth coalition." She kind of has, hasn't she? And that there is a mark of the madness, that in the space of a month, she can go from having maligned absolutely everybody for opposing her plans to opposing her plans herself. It's happened already. I think I got further into the programme yesterday before I felt that weird sort of feeling creeping up behind me. Where do you go? How do you talk about this stuff when it is so utterly without precedent? Is she now in the anti-growth coalition? Do you remember who is? I got my anti-growth coalition T-shirt on. I have, actually. Can someone come in and read all this? I've got my anti-growth No? Can someone come? No? Well, I can't read it upside down. Hang on. The Dutch, mime artists, people who played the recorder in school, triple cooked chips. I forgot about the microphone then. You can tell I was actually trying to read words that are currently written across my chest from the excellent people at Exploding Heads, who of course, came up with a comedy version of the Anti-Growth Coalition, which was only funny because it was so close to the reality of the Anti-Growth Coalition, which contained everybody now, up to and including Liz Truss herself. So the politics hasn't actually changed much since yesterday. The political picture is the same, I think, despite some sort of action, if you like, in the House of Commons. But the political picture is the same. What I think we have to focus on today is the personality, is the personal, not the political, but the personal. We have to talk about Liz Truss. We have to talk about Liz Truss because if you think that political events are unprecedented and almost beyond analysis, I'm afraid that the personal is probably beyond analysis as well. And when I say analysis, I'm conscious of the adjective Freudian sneaking in to your thoughts, or the idea of it being analysis of a sort of psychological kind. Yesterday, unless my eyes deceived me, and they may have done, the timing and the clips, and I don't think I was watching it live, but yesterday, Penny Mordaunt stood up in the House of Commons and explained that the Prime Minister couldn't respond to Keir Starmer's urgent question because she was doing very important things. She was doing very important things. But before Penny Mordaunt's response, have we got the chronology right on this? Before Penny Mordaunt's response to Keir Starmer's urgent question had concluded, Liz Truss slid into the chamber and sat down next to her. I'll say that again because sometimes I don't believe the words coming out of my own mouth. So Liz Truss sent Penny Mordaunt to deputise for her and respond in the House of Commons to an urgent question from Sir Keir Starmer. Penny Mordaunt, I think quite cleverly, wrote a couple of headlines for today's newspapers. You have to presume that she did so on purpose when she said that the Prime Minister is not hiding under a desk. The best thing you can do is ignore those sort of questions. And then, having been laughed at by the Labour Party, the woman that she was standing in for snuck in behind her and sat down at the benches. And this is where I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know whether it's a form of benign sexism, but I am not as comfortable criticising a woman as I am a man. I don't know how that reaches your ears. Listen, I'm perfectly capable of criticising women if they do appalling things, but criticising manner. She looked almost tranquilised yesterday. Actually, no, I've done myself a disservice. I was also a bit uncomfortable when people used to say similar things about George Osborne in the House of Commons, because the camera is a curious thing, isn't it? I had a job once which involved looking through, for example, 60 frames. This is before digital cameras. That's how old I am, children. Before digital cameras were a thing, really. as a show business journalist, I'd be handed 2 films worth of photographs that a paparazzo had taken outside the house of a famous person. And my job would be to go through them looking for a photograph, looking for the frame that fitted whatever story the news desk wanted me to write. So if, for example, Patsy Kensit was moving out of the marital home, or Liam Gallagher was moving out of the marital home, and the photographer had got 64 photographs of Patsy Kensit standing in the doorway watching the movers carry the sideboard into the back of a truck. And in one of them, she looked absolutely bereft and close to tears. But in the other 61, she looked perfectly cheerful and happy about things. I would be told to write 250 words on how unhappy she is. So they'd choose one picture. So I don't know if the footage I saw of Liz Truss yesterday looking tranquilised was the impression I would have got if I'd been in the House of Commons, or the impression I would have got if I had bumped into her an hour before or an hour after, any more than I know whether that ludicrous press conference she gave last week, where she sort of ended up looking a bit like I used the phrase yesterday, a meerkat on Mogadon, as she moved slowly, but like a periscope, looking desperately for a friendly journalist who might ask her a question that didn't involve reflecting upon her own future. I don't know whether she was like that for the whole press conference or whether she was like that before or afterwards, but I do know this. There aren't words now to describe what's happening. I mean, what is a lame duck prime minister? That's the lamest duck prime minister you can remember. If you're older than me, I mean, where would you go? I mean, that little period in the early 70s was weird, wasn't it? He had 2 or 3 general elections in a single year. Heath and Callaghan, Wilson and Macmillan, and then Thatcher, those sort of handovers, those relays. But there was never a sense of a Prime Minister having completely lost the support of their own parliamentary party. And of course, it's support that she never really had in the first place. This is where I think the damage to democracy is most acute. She never really had the support of her own parliamentary colleagues, very much like Jeremy Corbyn, actually, and the Labour Party. No value judgments. You may think it's wonderful that a leader goes into battle without the support of the troops behind him, but that's how the electoral system in both parties is now constructed. You can become leader of the party even if you don't have much support, certainly not first choice support in the Tories' case, or any support at all in Labour's case, from your own MPs. And she doesn't have any mandate or support from the country. The margin of her victory against Rishi Sunak was surprisingly small. So what's going on in her head is the only real question I want to ask you this morning. And let me explain a little further what I mean by that, because I don't want everyone ringing in and saying nothing. With Boris Johnson, I knew what was happening. We worked it out together, and we worked it out quite early. Those of us who followed his mayoralty probably had a little bit of a head start on everybody else, but his modus operandi has been clear since his school days. He is an utterly fraudulent individual. He is an epic liar. He has no real relationship with the truth in the way that you and I would understand. There's something almost sociopathic about his dishonesty. He is the kind of person, just like Billy Bunter, who would stand there covered in pie crumbs, swearing on everything available from the Holy Bible to the moon that he had not been near a pie. I have never, you know he would. He'd have bits of pie actually falling out of his mouth while he was telling you that he was not eating a pie. You know that he would. It's the tactics that you use to get out of trouble at boarding school. It's the tactics that you use to get an extra portion of porridge out of matron. It's the tactics that you use to somehow persuade your wife to stay with you after you've cheated on her for the 200th time. It's the tactics you use when you stand up in the House of Commons and claim not only that you hadn't been to a party when you had, but that there weren't even any parties, despite the fact that you'd been to them. I don't think you and I can actually understand the level of duplicity and deceit needed to be Boris Johnson. I genuinely don't think you can get an intuitive grasp of what it's like in his head, but you do know how he will respond to problems once you understand that if he felt it would benefit him for the next 5 minutes, he would tell you that a fish was a pebble. He would tell you that a car was a pumpkin. He would tell you that he was the Messiah. He would tell you absolutely anything if he thought it would get him to the end of that particular exchange. And then when you extrapolate from that personality defect, which of course in the context of Britain's class system and Britain's political system can become a strength, you extrapolate from that his political modus operandi, he will lie about anything in order to keep the support of people who've already joined his cult. So what would Boris Johnson do in this situation? He would claim that the reverse was a sign of political strength. He would claim that it was all somebody else's fault. He would claim that Labour would have been even worse. He'd say something about the vaccine, something about Brexit, and something about Keir Starmer having a curry. Or just something utterly shameless, something utterly unrooted from reality, but something which would still play well with this ludicrous constituency of our countrymen and women who cannot see through his fraudulence. So, what goes on in Liz Truss's head? Liz Truss is not a liar in the way that Boris Johnson is a liar. Liz Truss would not tell you that night was day. She might try to, but she wouldn't do it with her full chest. She wouldn't do it from a position almost of believing it. They say, don't they, the very best liars, in some dissonant way, some cognitively dissonant way, they believe their own lies. Boris Johnson, I think, believes his own lies. Boris Johnson, I think, believed himself when he said he wouldn't put a border in the Irish Sea. And he believed it when he claimed that the vaccine rollout in this country was the best in Europe, long after we'd been overtaken by other countries. It's just that tiny nugget of something around which he can build or could build an utter a sort of palace of nonsense. Truss doesn't have any of that. She thought that she was doing something really clever when she brought in her mini budget. And it falls to me to remind you, as absolute Herberts from places like the Institute of Economic Affairs continue to pop up all over your television and radio schedules. She was applauded. She was cheered to the rafters by everyone from the Tufton Street lobby groups masquerading as think tanks right through to the very front page of the best-selling newspaper in the country. 4 short weeks ago, they were calling her a genius. They were calling her a true conservative. They were calling her an absolute champ. And now, of course, they're queuing up to describe how she's a prime minister in name only, how she has how do they put it? No, in office but not in power. They think you're so stupid you'll forget what was on their own front page a month ago. And it pains me to point out that sometimes you give them quite a lot of support for that belief in your stupidity. So that's the bit now that I want to talk about, and I hope you do as well. I'll understand if you don't, and I'll come up with something else. But I want you to tell me what you think is going on in her own head now. What is she telling herself? Johnson, who I don't want to talk about, I'm just using him for the benefit of this introduction. Johnson, I don't even think has an inner dialogue in that sense. It's almost a sort of an innate, a trained behaviour whereby everything is about bluster, everything is about bloviation, everything is about distraction. I'll get through this scandal because I'll tell you what, there'll be another scandal along in 2 minutes and everyone will start talking about that. So I kind of got it. We did it, didn't we, together? We were never surprised by Boris Johnson. We were never surprised by the scale of the lie or the nastiness of the narcissism. We were never surprised. I'm supremely surprised by Liz Truss. And I have no idea what is currently making her tick. And I hate that. And I'm not even sure today that by 11 o'clock we'll have much of an idea. But at least we'll have more theories. So what is Liz Truss currently telling herself? She gave an interview to the BBC last night in which she almost laughed at what is happening. Johnny Mercer, the former Veterans Minister, describes again, she laughed as she sacked him and sent him into a spiral of depression because whatever you may think of the fella, his commitment to the cause of military veterans is both passionate and clear. But she laughed as she sacked him. What, nervously? Callously? I don't know. I got bored towards the end of Boris Johnson's premiership by how easy it was to unpick what he was doing, how easy it was to describe what he was doing, how easy it was to predict what he would do next. I have not got a clue what is going on with Liz Truss. And it's weird, actually, after 6 years of being able to plot pretty much every step of British democracy's decline into the current skip fire, the woman now in charge utterly eludes me. Understanding her, predicting her, it utterly eludes me. So I'll hand over to you. And forget about Boris Johnson. People messaging me, calling in already. I don't talk about Boris Johnson. I only want to talk about Liz Truss. All right? I'm tempted to say you can only ring me if you're going to come up with a theory on how she can cling on to power. But let's keep that in the back pocket. And instead, just look at this. What is she currently telling herself? She sees the same reports you see. She hears the same whispers you hear. She sees the same calls for her to go that you see. She's seen the same newspapers that were cheering her to the rafters a month ago, absolutely abandoning her now. And yet she insists she's going to lead them into the next general election. I'll take anything you've got on this, all right? You have to mean it. I don't want you to bring me your castles in the sky. You have to mean it, but I'm not going to forensically unpick it in pursuit of proving you wrong, because I've got nothing. And on the days when I've got nothing, I can hardly beat you up for having a tiny bit more than... So what is going on in Liz Truss's head? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. It's 90 minutes after 10. 22 minutes after 10, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We better listen to a bit of a clip, actually, of Liz Truss talking to Chris Mason, the political editor of the BBC. Very good, actually. I do enjoy Chris Mason's work. I've said that on radio. It's probably the kiss of death. I'll be bombarded with people telling me why it's the end of civilization as we know it, but hey-ho. And then we'll have a look at what we think is going on in her head, because, as I said a moment ago, I do not have a Scooby-Doo.
I'm sticking around because I was elected to deliver for this country, and that is what I am determined to do.
And will you lead the Conservatives into the next general election?
I will lead the Conservatives into the next general election.
Definitely.
Well, look, yeah. I'm not focused on internal debates within the Conservative Party.
But you need to be, don't you? You need to be in order to stay in office.
The important thing is that I've been elected to this position to deliver for the country. We are facing very tough times. We simply cannot afford to spend our time talking about the Conservative Party rather than what we need to deliver. And that is my message to my colleagues. I do want to accept responsibility and say sorry for the mistakes that have been made. I wanted to act, but to help people with their energy bills, to deal with the issue of high taxes, but we went too far and too fast. I've acknowledged that. I've put in place a new Chancellor with a new strategy to restore economic stability. And now what I'm focused on is delivering for the public.
Even more baffled as to what's going on in her head. And if that's a slightly, obtuse question, imagine that she comes home last night or the night before, any point really in the last month, closes the door behind her. There's no one around, no security. What does she do then? What is going on in her head? Let's start in Romford. Simon's there. Simon, off you go.
Hi, I'm a first-time caller, big fan.
Thank you.
I was going to say, for me, I think she trusts powerful people. People tell her things, and she just, without really thinking it through, she just trusts it. She was a Lib Dem, then she was a Conservative. She voted Remain, then Brexit, and then she kind of supports Brexit now. She was Republican, then she's now kind of she kind of supports the Royals. I think people tell her something, and it just goes, okay, I'm going to trust it. And then she just kind of parrots that and goes through with it.
Well, it can't be just that, can it? Because the governor of the Bank of England is quite powerful. We could leave it there. Joe Biden is quite powerful. He was fairly explicit about what he thought of trickle-down economics before this debacle started to unfold. So it's a particular type of powerful person, perhaps, that she's beholden to.
Maybe not powerful. I think of that whole thing which George Bush apparently had, that whole issue where the last person in the room would be able to convince him on a certain point or something. And then he'd be able to, that would be his view.
Yeah, but she's not, you see, I don't think, you've come up with some big examples, and they're good examples, but they're not actually evidence of flip-flopping. They're evidence of U-turning. Flip-flopping means you're going to change your mind from one day to the next, doesn't it? A U-turn is something that's usually undertaken very, very reluctantly. And just because she's been compelled to undertake quite a few lately doesn't make her a flip-flopper. It makes her a U-turner. There's a distinction there. George W. Bush was reportedly, as you say, he'd end up with the opinion of the last person he'd spoken to. Truss has been pretty cultish on Brexit and indeed on this. She hasn't abandoned her belief in trickle-down economics or in whatever she calls it, low-tax, high-growth economies. She's just paused it. She's just postponed it. So that can't be it, mate. Not that doesn't answer the question, really. Also, who are the people? I mean, these Herberts from Tufton Street. She fell in with them 12 years ago. They're not the last person that she spoke to. It runs a bit deeper than that, I think. Which doesn't mean which you have to do now is what's going on in her head at the moment.
Well, I think now she's in a position where she just doesn't. She has to. People are just telling her around her what she has to do, but she just she does it because that's how she works. People tell her what to do. She does it. She's told that this will protect the Conservative Party. So she'll just do it, and she's but then that's how she's always worked. That's what I would say.
So you're conflating the personal ambition with the survival now. I don't know if anyone's telling her what. Surely all the advice she's getting is going to be, you've got to go now. I mean, or they'll say, don't you think I'm doing a good job? And people will just look at their shoes. It'll be like something out of Yes Minister. That's what I mean by what's going on in her head. Do you think she believes... this fits. I'll meet you halfway. She thinks she's right even when everybody else is wrong. Crucially, she thinks that's a strength. And it is shaken at the moment, but not broken. So she's still sitting there telling herself she's the only one that actually understands it all and everybody else is wrong and stupid, which is kind of the Tufton Street way.
Yeah, she has to, at some point, she has to say, yes, I'm going to stand by this, and she'll stick by it. And then I guess that's where she has sticks her heels in the ground and says, I'm not going to move on this issue.
And that's why
even though it's completely wrong.
Yeah, and that's why they can talk about being victims of global movements, or the Telegraph today sort of tries to blame it all on the lockdown. People have tried to blame it on Remainers. I saw one fellow yesterday claiming it's all a Brussels conspiracy. I mean, these people really are out to lunch, but... I mean, what's going on inside her head is the question. So there it is, perhaps. I'm right and everybody else is wrong. Even as the evidence mounts up, my belief, and that takes us back to Brexit, the belief can overcome the reality, will overcome all. I'm not going to squeeze Audrey and Folkestone into the time available because I don't think that would be fair. And I am going to endeavour, and I have been miserable in the last few days. I've been shockingly bad at this. God knows if anyone actually breaks the programme down to count how many minutes I use with my own pontifications and contemplations and how many we actually find for callers. And do you know what the worst thing is? I relax when the switchboard's full. Have I told you this before? So the shows when I talk the most are the shows when the switchboard is full, which is an appalling way to behave. It's upside down, really. The longer the queue to talk on air, the more likely I am to use up all the on-air time myself. Largely, I guess, because the madder things are, the keener you are to speak and the more I've got to get off my chest. So it's 10:30, very nearly. After 10:30, a little bit less of me and a little bit more of you, hopefully. But, that's a promise that I have made and failed to keep before. So there's no point giving you the phone number, actually, because you won't get through for a while. But we are contemplating what might be unfolding inside the head of Liz Truss. Time now is 10:29. Holly Harris is here with your headlines. 10:33 is the time, and it gets worse, but how bad can it be if you're already at rock bottom? You're just it's scrapings, isn't it, from the bottom of the barrel. But James Heappey, who is a minister in the current government, cabinet minister, has said it would be completely disingenuous to claim that on that morning when cabinet was presented with the mini budget, that there was anybody sat around the table who said that it was a bad idea. And just take that for a moment and reflect upon it. So every single member of Cabinet is complicit in both the disaster of the mini-budget and the humiliation of the U-turn. Except Jeremy Hunt, who wasn't in the Cabinet at the time. Audrey's in Folkestone. Audrey, what is going on in Liz Truss's head?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hello.
I think that the starting problem with Liz Truss is that she's been involved in some pretty... strange think tanks, so she's almost been groomed to brainwash to believe that all these things are correct, which has almost taken away her ability to think for herself. And now it's all come crashing down, and it's like being at school and you've done something really, really, really badly wrong, and you know your mum and dad's going to really, really tell you off. So you'll say anything, and you can. On a human level, not for what she's done to the country, that is unbelievable. But on a human level, you can see that she is utterly terrified. She doesn't know what to say, what to do. I'll just keep saying this, it'll be all right. I'll just keep saying this, it'll be all right. I'm a bit like that when I go to the dentist. I'm terrified of the dentist, and I say to myself, I'll be all right in an hour. I'll be all right in an hour.
But that's not entirely rational. That's sort of more like a phobia. Whereas Liz Truss's reaction to what's happened to her is quite rational, and I agree with you for what it's worth. I think she does look she looks shell shocked, and she thinks that if she just keeps saying the things that got there it is. You're right, aren't you? If she keeps saying the things that got her this far, then that's my best chance. Not necessarily everything's going to be all right, or not necessarily this too will pass, but I'll just keep saying the things that got me this far. I wonder whether there's even, Audrey, a bit of her that can't quite believe the things that she said to get to where she is worked. She sort of thinks, God, I can't believe people fell for it. All I kept saying was, we'll deliver. And then I said some stuff about low tax, high growth. And I never had any calculations. I wouldn't even let Kwasi publish the OBR reports. And I just kept saying stuff about trade deals. It was all meaningless. It was all gibberish. But it worked. Look at me. I'm Prime Minister. You can't argue with that. I'm literally sitting here in number 10 Downing Street. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just keep saying all the things that got me here.
Exactly.
Oh, it's depressing,
she's
though.
not the brightest bunny.
I don't think she is. I don't think she is.
That's half the problem. You know, what do you do when you're cornered?
You know, on a personal level, do you feel sorry for her?
As a human being, yes.
See, you're a liberal. You're one of those liberals, aren't you, with your empathy and your compassion? I bet you voted Remain as well.
I don't see, on a human, I mean, it's okay for me. My mortgage is not being renewed. I'm not going to be running around trying to feed my family. I'm in a different place to other people that are out there with their hands in their head thinking, where am I going to find the extra £500? How am I going to feed my family? As a human being, any human being, it's like ambulance drivers when they go out to awful things, and they never judge who the person in front of them is. They just help them. On that level, I can feel sorry for.
I can as well. That's why I asked you. I wanted you to go first because I didn't want everyone to laugh at me. But I can. I mean, even though I find what she's done utterly reprehensible, and I find everything she represents politically, as we've discussed endlessly on this programme, utterly corrupt. I think the damage done to Britain from 2016 onwards is immeasurable, and it's obviously going to take generations to fix. But on a very, very human level, when you see a person, you almost see the little girl inside her on occasion. You sort of think. And you keep thinking, and I hope this isn't inappropriate, I keep thinking, I bet she wants her dad. I bet she wants to talk to her dad, because that's how I always feel when I'm right up against it. And, of course, reportedly, her dad is deeply ashamed of what she's become politically. So even that is going to add to the burdens that she carries, the psychic toll that she suffers under. And I think you can't not feel a bit sorry for her in those circumstances, even if you want her to get out of Downing Street in the next 10 minutes.
Yes.
We're too nice, Audrey. That's our problem. That's it. That's our problem. Far too nice. Nate's in Paynton. Nate, what would you like to say? What's she up to? What's going on?
So I have a theory for you, James.
Carry on,
so
mate.
my theory is that she's a bit of a mimic. So I think when she went for the leadership campaign, she thought in her head that if she adopts the strength of Margaret Thatcher and the rhetoric of Boris Johnson, she'll be like the greatest Prime Minister of all time. So I think that all she's thinking at the moment is, what would Margaret Thatcher do? How would Boris Johnson say this? And she hasn't got the integrity or the strength of Margaret Thatcher, and she hasn't got the charisma of Boris Johnson. So I mean, we could. I'm not going to debate
the words that you just used to describe those two politicians, but that's certainly how she sees Margaret Thatcher and Boris Johnson. And I'd take charisma and just give it a side order of ability to successfully lie.
Yeah. Yeah, deceitfulness, however you want to put it.
Charismatic deceitfulness.
Yeah, she's someone who wants to be a rugby player and has found herself in the World Cup of rugby facing a massive giant of a man running towards her. You know, she's painting herself as this character, but because she's being an actress rather than herself, I think she could have been a reasonable Prime Minister.
Do you?
If she did. I don't think she's intelligent, but I think she could have been okay. I think she could have been a John Major kind of boring but plodding along until the next general election.
Yeah.
But she came in and she went, I'm going to do... I don't think she's listening to advisors, because I think she's doing the Thatcher... I'm really strong, I'm going to punch this home.
No, well, I'll pick you up on that, because this ludicrous Institute of Economic Affairs have literally... I mean, it didn't last very long, but they were boasting about how they had successfully taken over Downing Street, and how she was the politician more than any other who had attended their events over the last 12 years. And she even set up some group under the auspices under their umbrella. So, I mean, this is not a newly discovered enthusiasm for the nonsense of vampire economics, or trickle down, as it's sometimes called. That's not something that's popped up. She spent a decade polishing this conviction, if it is a conviction.
In my defence, James, I said advisors, not puppet masters.
No, so you're being glib now, which is absolutely fine. I mean, that would be pot kettle, but they are advisors. She's surrounded herself with people from Tufton Street. They all, I mean, I don't know whether any of them believe it or not, but they're all paid by anonymous donors to espouse the idea that we should just let business act untrammelled and unregulated, and somehow that will be good for everybody else. I guess it's about filling gaps, Nate. So do
you believe that she genuinely believes in...
That's what I'm about to say. I don't know. That's what I mean by filling gaps. So she looked at herself 20 years ago and thought, there's a gap. I want to be Prime Minister, but I don't actually have an ideology. I really need an ideology. And then she went shopping. Yeah.
She's a doppelganger surrounded by the people you just described. So I think if you put her in a room full of like lefty, liberal, lovely people like yourself... and you left her there for a week, she'd probably come out expelling, how good...
Either that or she'd come out in hives. But she was in a room full of lefty liberals for a long time, for the early part of her political career, when she was giving speeches to conference about the abolition of the monarchy. And one theory suggests, of course, that she didn't see a path to power. I think it was Tim Farron, who can't remember whether she was there or not, but he was joking at one point about how the Conservative Party was in such disarray. This would be late 90s, wouldn't it? That if you could get into the Conservative Party now, you'd have a better chance of becoming Prime Minister, or a better chance of becoming leader, because of the sort of chaos that had engulfed the party. It may have been later than late 90s, but I'm pretty sure Tim Farron has said he used to say that at meetings with potential candidates and activists, but he can't remember whether she was ever actually at one of them. Tom's in, thank you, Nate, from Devon up to Yorkshire. Tom's in Sheffield. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello.
Yeah, you asked, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. What's going on in her head?
Hi, James. Good morning.
Have you got your radio? If you've got your radio on in the background, Tom, you need to go and turn it off, mate. All right, because that's why you're having a conversation with me in a sort of form of duplicate. There's a slight delay on it, which we always warn callers about, but some of them perhaps don't believe us. Keith's in Arsley in Bedfordshire. Keith, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James.
Hello,
good morning. I'm kind of listening to you out while I'm walking the dog at the moment, and
That's
the lady
nice.
you just asked the lady, did she feel sorry for Liz Truss?
Yes.
This is the question. I've got to disagree with you, mate. No, I don't.
Well, you can't disagree with me, because I do. You can just say I don't. You can't disagree with me, because that's telling me that I don't feel sorry for her, and I kind of do.
Mate,
it doesn't keep me awake at night, mate, and I haven't got the violin out of the case, but just on a very human level, I don't like watching people in agony.
No, but I don't. I feel more sorry for the people that are going to work. And
So do I. It's not a competition. I feel much sorrier for them as well, but I don't like watching people in agony.
Well, but if it was a horse that had fallen at the fence, you'd have put it down by now.
Exactly,
So,
but I'd feel sorry for the horse.
Well, I certainly have more sympathy for a horse.
Behave yourself.
I kind of think that, well, if we're looking at that, you'd kind of think that the 1922 committee should be the men with the gun, really, wouldn't you, really?
Yeah, metaphorically speaking. What do you think's going on in her head at the moment?
Well, I was just saying to your colleague, I mean, I think it's survival. I think they've said, I don't think there's any semblance of reality. I just think her whole political career has just been non-reality. I mean, it's right the way going back from, like 2016 with the debacle that happened then. There were so many people that just said things that had no meaning, and we've had the previous Prime Minister. I mean, he'd just say anything, and I think Liz Truss thinks the same thing. I can just say anything,
So this is the closest we're going to get to a consensus. So in a way, there's a little bit of Thatcher in there, definitely. I think it was Nate that made that point. And so she thinks she can cosplay Thatcher. She even dressed up as Thatcher at one point.
Yes.
Well, more than one point, actually. And some of the photo opportunities were ridiculously reflective of things Thatcher had done. So she tries to do the sort of resolve of Thatcher, the ladies not for turning stuff, whereas, of course, yesterday Liz Truss was the lady not for turning up, as Keir Starmer pointed out. And then the Boris stuff, but she's neither of them. She doesn't have Thatcher's self-belief or resolve, and she doesn't have Boris Johnson's ability to lie through his teeth and bring millions of people with him.
Do you know what it is, James? I think one of the things that she's like, she's almost like an oil tanker that takes 5 miles to stop.
Yeah.
You know, she started this thing rolling. Probably, if she's being honest with herself, did she really think she'd get the deal?
Yes, she did. She did. She categorically did. She would have seen the front pages of the Daily Mail and seeing all the think tankers lining up, all the usual Brexity pundits who've been wrong about everything for 6 and a bit years, all cheering her to the rafters, and she'd have been high-fiving herself all the way around Downing Street. Well, of course, everybody honest and sensible was sitting there, from Rishi Sunak right through to the Bank of England, was sitting there going, this is an absolute skip fire.
Disaster.
What are you doing?
Absolutely.
And that's the question. No. So when Rishi Sunak and the governor of the Bank of England and pretty much every qualified economist in the country, except the 3 or 4 of them that thought Brexit would be a good idea, when they're all queuing up, the anti-growth coalition, everybody with an IQ in double figures or above, are all queuing up to say this is ridiculous. What does she say in her head to persuade herself that it isn't? What does she say? What can she see that we can't see? That's the mystery to me this morning. I haven't got a clue, he says. I've got a dog to walk, James, he says. Give me a break.
There's an image gone in my head at the moment. I thought I can't repeat that on national.
That'll do nicely. Thank you very much indeed, Keith. 10:51 is the time. What is going on in her head? And, of course, it's unlikely to be a very complicated answer. I always have a weakness, a tendency to lean towards the complex when, of course, the thing we often say on the programme is when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever you are left with, however improbable, must be the truth. And I think the closest we're getting to the truth at the moment is a combination of 2 horses. One of them is she's just going to say all the stuff that she said to get this far again and again and again because it's worked and it's all she's got, coupled with this idea that if she can sort of channel the spirit animal of Margaret Thatcher and or Boris Johnson, then she'll be okay. But she's really bad at that bit. She's a rubbish Margaret Thatcher tribute act, and she's an even worse Boris Johnson tribute act because she's not a natural liar. She's not a sort of sociopath or narcissist or whatever the official diagnosis of Boris Johnson would be. That ability to lie on a level that even the average, delinquent schoolboy would struggle to pull off. She just can't do that. And even if she tries to, she doesn't believe it in her heart of hearts in the way that Johnson could persuade himself, or Johnson just did innately believe untruths if they served him well. And she doesn't have, whether you liked the conviction or not, she doesn't seem to have the conviction of Margaret Thatcher, although I bet if you really held her down on this one, she would see herself more Thatcher than Johnson. Johnson's like the tactical cosplay. Thatcher would be the kind of foundational cosplay, and she's crud at both. He said a rudish word. Then she's rubbish at both. Back to Tom in Sheffield. Hopefully not with his radio on in the background. Tom, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Apologies.
That's all right.
Yes, I think it's a classic example of cognitive dissonance. You said, what's going on in Liz Truss's mind? I think on the one hand, she absolutely still holds firm to this ideology of small state, bonfire of the regulations, low taxes, etc. But on the other, I think that on some level, she recognises what has happened. She's lost her Chancellor, her mini-budget or fiscal statement's been completely or mostly reversed, and she now has Jeremy Hunt as her Chancellor. So, the so-called One Nation Tory.
So if you said to her, why did it go so badly wrong, what would she say under this analysis?
Okay, what she would say is that the vested interests were all ranged against her and against her government's ideology. The globalists, the city, the Remainers. It would be all the conspiracy of, the Treasury orthodoxy, mandarins, the city. Yeah, absolutely.
And that is why she's not a flip-flopper. This is, I prefer your analysis to the idea. Someone's just sent me a clip of Indecisive Dave from the Fast Show. I don't know if you remember the character who changes opinion according to whatever the bloke next to him in the pub said, and he'd do a full 180 on it according to whatever the last fella said. She's not like that. She's still in. If you could read her mind, she would still claim to be committed to these principles that have been utterly destroyed in the cold light of day.
No question. She is a true believer, as the cliche goes. She's drank the Kool-Aid. They're enthralled to the Mark Littlewoods of this world. She, Kwasi and others, they genuinely believe this stuff. They believe that this is the answer to the various challenges that the country
You're referring
faces.
to the head of the IEA, and he may well believe the stuff that he espouses, but of course until they reveal who funds them, we're left with some doubt over whether or not he's sharing his own views or the views of whoever it is that pays their wages. But how can you believe that? I mean, it's such an obviously busted flush. Especially this week, especially now.
Yeah, when you're confronted with the reality, that's my point about cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, then you have to say, no, it is true. It is true.
Yeah, you can deny the reality that you're confronted with, and you can rationalise it in your own mind. There's a parallel with the Brexiteers, James. Look, 6 years on,
of course there is,
abundance of evidence that Brexit has been, a really bad idea, and that all of the kind of economic warnings and so on, many of them have come true. But the Brexiteers will tell you, well, we just haven't done it properly, and it's all the conspiracy of the EU and others. Unfortunately, they are not open to rational engagement and argument. It's fundamental ideology, and I'm afraid Liz Truss is the same.
I always think that ideology is too complimentary a word to describe this. I think that's one of the great achievements of this ludicrous ecosystem, this echo chamber of think tanks and lobby groups and conservative activists and right-wing journalists. They never speak to anybody else. So they've created the idea that it's an ideology, but it's not. It's a fetish. It's simply the idea that if you let the rich people do whatever the hell they want, the only way we're ever going to persuade a population to let rich people do whatever the hell they want is if we pretend it'll be good for everybody else. That's it. That's the ideology. So Liz Truss clearly doesn't believe that. She's not deliberately accelerating the interest of the very rich in the knowledge that it won't be good for everybody else. She's somehow been persuaded that it will be good for everybody else. That's the bit I struggle with. I understand if you're on the payroll why you would be knocking this stuff out on a daily basis. I understand why if you're on the payroll you'd be doing it. But I guess all cult leaders need to have people handing over their wages every month, don't they, in order to keep the whole project afloat. And this isn't a financial project, it is an ideas. It's a fetish that needs to be put into the mainstream.
And it would be amusing if it were not so catastrophic for the country and for millions of people up and down the country facing, real everyday challenges in terms of their finances and so on. These people are in charge, they have responsibility. Where's the sense of responsibility towards the country? None whatsoever. What they're doing now is all about the survival of the Conservative Party.
That's a useful point. That's not quite what we're talking about today, but it's good that you've brought it in, because a lot of these MPs, if not all of them, are not going to be motivated by what they think of Liz Truss in their heart of hearts or what they think of the state of the nation. They're going to be motivated entirely by what is most likely to enhance their survival prospects. I think it was Sir Charles Walker the other day talking about joining the Privileges Committee to sit in judgment on Boris Johnson, saying that he is free because he's not standing at the next election. So he is motivated entirely by a pursuit of truth. He's got no interest whatsoever. I'm embellishing slightly what he said, but he's not worried about survival. He's not worried about what happens at the next election. And I think there was a Tory MP this week who said something similar. We should be putting the national interest above party or personal interest. But my advice to anybody hoping for that to happen would be to not hold your breath. Steve's in Bournemouth. Steve, what do you think's going on?
Yeah, hi James. Have you heard of the hierarchy of competence?
Yes, I have. Okay, I can't remember the name. Maslow, is it?
No, it's not Maslow, but it's similar. I'm in education. Right. I forgot the name who created it.
Don't worry.
Anyway, So I think that Boris Johnson was consciously incompetent. And now what you've also got on the hierarchy of competence is unconsciously incompetent.
That's nice.
So Boris Johnson knew exactly that he was aware that he couldn't pull off the job that he was set up to do. However, Liz Truss...
And it didn't matter. It didn't matter because he'd be able to, look over there, a fox or something like that.
Because in his character, which Liz Truss doesn't have, is arrogance. Now, another one of Liz Truss's heroes is Maggie Thatcher.
Yes.
So Maggie Thatcher, we know that within her characteristics, she's firm, she's determined. That's another thing. And what she's trying to do is take on her mentors, her role models' characteristics, but she's not able to do it. She doesn't know what she doesn't know. And I think what's going on in her mind at the moment is, what would Boris do? Well, Boris would just be arrogant and just sort of bluff his way through it.
Yes, of course he would.
And she's trying to do that, but she doesn't know how. She's not trained in the way that he is. She's not a sociopath. She wasn't brought up the same way that Boris was, which was to treat people like servants and be arrogant and and things like this. So it's all fake to her, and that's what's in her mind. She is faking it until she makes it, and she's not getting anywhere. She is.
Well, she is Prime Minister.
Incompetent.
So that's the final piece of your jigsaw, is that she's faking. She has made it. So in her mind, doing again all the things she's done to get to here should work. It should get her out of trouble because it got her into Downing Street.
She's been promoted to the point of her own incompetence. Now,
that's another theory, isn't it? Go on quickly. We're short of time.
Sorry, I think she was already promoted to the point of incompetence when she was Foreign Secretary, possibly even before that. But at this point now, what we're seeing is a person who is struggling. And they don't want to give up because they keep trying to look.
Well, then we are,
oddly,
the not wanting to give up and pressing on. Actually, you mentioned the hierarchy of competence, and I attributed it to Maslow, who of course is the hierarchy of need. And at the top of the hierarchy of need, the thing you can do when you've dealt with everything else is self-actualization. So that that desire to be forget the exact phrase, the most that you can be, is all that's driving her now. Is the self-actualization side of things. Because to step down now, good grief, that's when I stop feeling sorry for her. When you realise that the motivation to stay in the job is driven chiefly by the fear of humiliation, and that is being prioritised over the national interest, and that's really ugly. That's really dangerous. Thank you, Steve. I'm sorry we didn't have more time. It's 11:01. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Okay, I can't move away from politics. I was intending to today. Perhaps we will at 12. There are lots of other stories around. That astonishing report into the state of the police. The Metropolitan Police yesterday, really at the top of the list. And I promise you we'll cover it. If not today, then tomorrow. And it's of course PMQs tomorrow. But I mean, it's like, I don't know what it's like. I can't tear my eyes away from it. It's just unbelievable. She's pledged to lead Tories into the next general election after completely abandoning all the things that got her elected. Robert Shrimsley, a very astute writer in the Financial Times, points out that we've all ended up with Rishi Sunak's policies and Liz Truss's presentation skills. So, thinking back over the last hour, and I have got a slightly better idea. Thank you, actually. As you'd expect on this programme, when I shut up for a while, we get some astonishing calls and we can come to a slightly better understanding of some of the things that confuse us. It's the pomposity and the entitlement of these people that I find so upsetting. The Cabinet have just come out of Downing Street. I think these pictures are recent. And what's his name? The Kit Malthouse, who was one of Boris Johnson's people when he was in City Hall, one of the people who created the myth that Boris Johnson's success lay in surrounding himself with excellent people, a myth created by the idiots that Boris Johnson surrounded himself with. Think of Lord, good grief, Daniel Moylan and various other characters. That was one of the greatest brainwashing exercises in the history of recent British politics. All the idiots that Boris Johnson surrounded himself with created the myth that Boris Johnson had a knack of surrounding himself with excellent people. Oh dear, I get distracted sometimes by the screens in front of me. It's like a parlour game. It's like the most ridiculous, incompetent and unintelligent politicians in the history of British politics are all in the cabinet. Well, apart from Nadine Dorries, who turned down an opportunity and just now sort of sits in the background writing love letters to Boris Johnson with Swalk on the back and, putting in her last Rolo or a couple of love hearts. It's just pathetic, absolutely pathetic. But we must move on. I have come to a slightly better understanding of what Truss is actually up to in her own head. We'll never know for sure. I'm not even sure she knows for sure, but the behaviour is explained by two things: thinking she can style it out by sort of doing karaoke Thatcher or karaoke Johnson, thinking alongside karaoke Thatcher and karaoke Johnson, she could just keep saying the things that got her elected because it worked. She can keep saying the things that the 80-odd thousand people that voted for her in the Conservative leadership election really wanted to hear. Something about low taxes and high growth without really any calculations, any working out. And don't listen to that fella Sunak over there explaining why this is all fantasy island. I'll just keep saying it all. She appears to still believe it. But that may be just a way of avoiding an utter apology, an utter retreat. So she'll just say other factors have made it not work. We made mistakes not because we're idiots, but because of other stuff that we should have been aware of, and the events, dear boy, events. But we will at some point return to our dream of Singapore by the sea or whatever it is that motivates her. So you've got the karaoke and catchphrase. There it is. We've done it. That's lovely. At the end of that last hour, that's what's dropped out at the bottom. Karaoke and catchphrases. So she does karaoke Thatcher and karaoke Johnson in the hope that she can somehow channel the political effectiveness of those two Conservative prime ministers, even though she doesn't have Thatcher's resolve or Johnson's ability to lie very convincingly. She'll do karaoke Thatcher and karaoke Johnson, and then she'll do the catchphrases as well. Deliver, deliver, deliver. It's not the best catchphrase I've ever heard, but it worked. It got her into Downing Street. Why would she abandon it? Deliver, deliver, deliver. And high growth, low tax, something, Brexit, something. That's it. That's what she's got. That's who she is. So in her head, I don't think that there's a fourth gear. This is where one runs the risk of sounding very condescending. But in the terms of intellect, right, think of the intellect as gears. Have you ever ridden a fixed gear bicycle? Okay? It doesn't matter how hard you pedal, you will not go any faster. So geared bicycles are theoretically infinite in their pursuit of speed, aren't they? Is there, or do you still have a point on the top gear? You're just never going to reach it. You're always going to be able to go faster on a normal bar, or at least you're always going to, because you could go down a hill. You're going to feel that you are. But on a fixed gear bicycle, the first time I rode a Piranha BMX with banana mag wheels, and I was pegging it along, getting ready to do a jump, and I realised that I wasn't actually going faster. I'd reached top speed. There was nowhere higher to go. On my drop handle Hawk racing bike at the time, which I bought from Woolworths after winning £100 on the premium bonds, I could have flicked a gear and carried on pedalling, and I would have gone a little bit faster. Do you see what I mean? She doesn't have the gears. She's in top gear and it's third. Some of us are lucky enough to have a fourth. Some even have a fifth. Some may have a sixth. Stephen Hawking had a 10th. She's stuck in third. So it doesn't matter how hard she pedals, she's never going to go faster. So we can sit here going, yeah, I think it's karaoke and catchphrases, but how can that be? Because it's so hollow and inadequate. But that's the extent. She's at full speed. Karaoke and catchphrases, that's the maximum for Liz Truss. That's where it ends. There's nowhere beyond karaoke and catchphrases. That's a hint. That's a Gobi Desert. There's nothing there. That's it. The jar is full. The ship has sailed. It's karaoke and catchphrases. There's nothing left. There's nothing else. So that's why she's doing it. My God, I think we've solved it, Watson. I think that's it. That's me just knitting together all the calls we took in the last hour, looking at what's unfolding in front of us, concluding reluctantly that it's all about karaoke and catchphrases, and then realising that is the full extent of her talent. How many callers commented on her obvious lack of intelligence? And by intelligence, we mean intellectual gears. You might be able to absorb and regurgitate enough to pass A-levels or go to Oxford University, but to actually understand stuff, to come up with original ideas, to be a genuine thinker, you need a fourth gear and a fifth gear. Which is why she just absorbs whatever is being served up by whatever vampires are at the front of the Tufton Street queue. And there it is. There's no fourth gear and fifth gear. So what you will expect, what you will get until Liz Truss leaves Downing Street is karaoke and catchphrases. You'll get Boris Johnson and Margaret Thatcher tribute acts, and you'll get repetition of all the things that got her elected in the first place. And that's it, I'm going home. Can I go home? That's it. I've got nothing else. I've solved it. We've done it. We've done it again. We've absolutely nailed it. It's karaoke and catchphrases because that's literally all she can do. That's the full extent of her own powers of comprehension. Well, it worked. Why won't it work again? She doesn't even have the capacity to think about why it won't work again. Why the repetition of catchphrases and the pound shop karaoke that got her elected as leader of the Conservative Party, how she can't compute the possibility that that won't be enough to constitute good governance. That won't be enough to render her a good Prime Minister, but it worked. But karaoke and catchphrases worked. I'm Prime Minister. I'm literally lying in bed in Downing Street. You can't tell me that it doesn't work. It works. I'm Prime Minister. I've got nothing else. Karaoke and catchphrases. 11:12 is the time. No, I didn't have, I don't think I had the Aero Zytec mags on my Piranha. Actually, it wasn't actually my Piranha, it was my sister's. But that's a whole different story. So what we're going to talk about next. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. Geared bicycles have infinite speed may not be one of those quotes that I want to have on my CV forevermore. All right, but you understood the point I made. You hit top speed on a fixed gear bicycle, you can't go any higher. Obviously, on a geared bicycle, when you're in top gear and you hit top speed, you can't go any higher either, but you're very unlike... Anyway, I've done the analogy. It worked quite well. Just that one unfortunate misspeak. But there it is. There it is, karaoke and catchphrases. So, I mean, there are two obvious questions that present themselves now. One is, how did she get the job? I can't believe that weeks after it happened, we can actually have a shared sense of befuddlement. Do you know that a majority of Conservative Party members have already got buyer's remorse? They're already saying that they wish they'd gone with Rishi Sunak. Which maybe gives the lie to the racism theory, the very popular theory that one of the main reasons why Rishi Sunak didn't beat Liz Truss was because of a antipathy towards brown-skinned people from members of the Conservative base. I mean, there definitely is some. You don't have to be. You don't need a karaoke. I beg your pardon. You don't need a magnifying glass to see it. But I don't know, and we'll never know how much of it was a factor. But the fact that they are now polling to say we wish we'd gone with Sunak suggests that it may not have been as big a factor as some people contended. That notion of how it happened, I think, is probably worth a few minutes today, don't you? How did she actually win? Given that because I couldn't follow the hustings. I found them absolutely intolerable, unbearable. This idea of bald people fighting over a comb without ever mentioning the fact that the reason why we're in such a hole is Brexit just bored me rigid. It's all so pointless. All of this is pointless. The Conservative Party's death throes, their psychodrama, whatever you want to call it, still wheeling out people like Ian Duncan Smith as if they're worth listening to on any subject under the sun. Two levers battling to become leader of the Conservative Party without ever acknowledging that the reason why the country's fallen down a hole is entirely because of the Brexit that they continue to back. Just struck me as an utter waste of time. So I wasn't really paying attention, and I know a lot of other people would be the same. So I think we'll do that question now. How did she actually win? 0345 6060 973. Explain to me, but also, of course, to our favourite listener, the one who's been in a coma for 6 months, how did Liz Truss become Prime Minister? 0345 6060 973. Got a lot of people waiting to talk on other subjects, so I'm going to need to free a couple of those phone lines up. I really want people to tell me an idiot's guide, and I'm happy to play the idiot. How did Liz Truss become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I'm going to say it again because I want absolute clarity on the second part of the programme. How did Liz Truss become Prime Minister? It's 11:15. It is 11:18, and it's a question for the ages, but it's one we're asking now. How did Liz Truss become Prime Minister? How could somebody who has so quickly and so completely demonstrated their utter unfitness for office, without even having the camouflage that Boris Johnson enjoyed by being a brilliant liar or a brilliant propagandist or a brilliant demagogue or whatever phrase you prefer, she didn't even have that. So how on earth did she become Prime Minister? There's a good line here from just a chap called Pavel who follows me on Twitter. I don't know what his professional qualifications are, but he just writes, Liz Truss is obviously way out of her depth, but it's a completely dysfunctional political and media ecosystem that allowed her to thrive within it. The warning signs were there, but instead we had a lengthy and indulgent leadership contest which was completely divorced from reality. There's something in that, isn't there? But there's going to be a million different answers to this question, so let's start collecting them. Linton is in Bear Regis. I've not heard of... I know Lyme Regis. I don't know Bear Regis.
That'll do, James. Good morning.
Hello, Linton. What have you got for me?
Well, I live in a very conservative area, ultra-conservative.
Yes.
And when the leadership election was going on, I mean, this is an anecdote.
Of course.
But there were two guys who you might call the golf club boys in my local pub.
Well, I've never met them. What would you call them?
I think I would call them golf club balls.
Exactly.
Too, James.
Trying to pin it all on me. Outrageous behaviour. Go on.
Anyway, one of them said, "Who are you voting for in the election?" The other one said, "Liz Truss." So the first one says to the other one, "Not Rishi Sunak. Why not?" And the first one said, "He's too clever by half."
Gosh.
And that was the worst thing that you could be. They would prefer a dimwit who believed in what they're doing to a clever person
Why?
that knew what they were doing.
Why do we think that is?
Good question, James. I don't know.
Is it because Rishi Sunak makes him feel a bit stupid, and he doesn't want someone who makes him feel stupid? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
That could well be the case. I mean, I didn't.
No, you were too busy. You were too busy eavesdropping. You didn't want to join in.
No, I didn't. But
Too
it seems to
clever
me
by
that it was
half.
nothing to do with him being brown.
No, of course.
It was nothing to do with him believing something else or having different economic views. It was that he was too clever by half.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And that does. I think it must be. It must be the idea that I don't want someone who makes me feel intimidated intellectually, or someone who talks about stuff I don't understand. So we're back to the gears. So if you've got 3 gears, you don't want someone talking about what fourth gear and fifth gear are going to deliver. You want someone doing karaoke and catchphrases, because that's the extent of what you can understand and what you can...
Absolutely.
Oh, it's close to condescending. I'm glad you said that and not me. Linton, take care. I'll take that. Too clever by half. Again, we're in danger of overthinking things. Maybe it appeals to people similarly equipped. I don't want this complicated stuff about inflation and... What? Inflation and the interest rates and inflation, and if you do that and you borrow, then no, just say something that I got. Okay, deliver. Oh, I like that. But again, this is back to Brexit again. How do you describe the motivation of people who don't really understand what's going on without sounding a little bit condescending or smug? Unfortunately, the cabinet's now full of people who don't know what's going on. So let's focus as much on them. How did Liz Truss become Prime Minister? Doug's in Glastonbury. Doug, what do you reckon?
Hi there. So I have a theory that basically how she got power was the Tories became the Brexit party after the Brexit vote. Boris became the human embodiment of Brexit.
Yes.
Rishi was perceived to have stabbed him in the back and removed him from power.
Yes.
And then the parliamentary party, their favourite was Rishi. The second choice sort of differed. At first it seemed like Penny Mordaunt might get in, but it was up for grabs. Liz snuck in through the back door, and essentially a wet sponge could have won against Rishi with the members after, they perceived him to
be
destroy...
the he who wields the dagger never wears the crown, Doug.
Exactly, yeah.
But they've switched already, so talk me through that. Polling is polling, of course. We take it with a pinch of salt, sometimes with a whole cellar. But they now regret. They've already expressed buyer's remorse. They wish they'd put Sunak in Downing Street, which doesn't destroy your theory, but it tickles it, certainly, doesn't it?
Well, I think the parliamentary party do, for sure.
No, this is the membership. This is a poll of the membership. I think it's in the Times. I've certainly seen it this morning.
The 500 members?
No, there's more than 500. Don't be cheeky.
No, as in the poll was of 500.
Oh, I see, of 5.
members.
Yeah, but we can't. I mean, the methodology of polling is pretty reliable. We can't. You either set some store by them or you never refer to them ever again. So I think we have to set some store by them.
No, I agree, but I like to keep an eye on what's going on with the people who did vote for Brexit,
Yes.
voted for Johnson, voted for Truss, and I think they're going to be back on the fringes. That they're, talking about Reform Party, the Brexit Party, UKIP.
I get them all mixed up. Are they not all the same now? Have they not all joined forces? Like sort of, I don't know when.
Well, yeah, that's what they want because they realise they are back on the fringes. And they're clinging on to this idea that if all of those fringe parties got together, that, they'd still have a chance of a Brexit
So
candidate.
she's simply, and again, you're right, I think, to remind us of the psephology here. It is not a question about big pictures. It's a question about, well, to be unkind for a moment and a bit glib, it's a question about golf club boards. It's a question about people who pay subs to be in the Conservative Party. And not all of them. Some of them are wonderful, intelligent, imaginative people, but they're unlikely to be the ones. They're unlikely to be the ones that voted for Liz Truss. So it's about the ones that voted for Liz Truss, and they just were buying a sort of very tabloidy narrative of the betrayal of Boris Johnson, even as his approval ratings across the country had gone through the floor. Among the people that got to choose the next leader, the Kool-Aid was a long way from wearing off, wasn't it?
Well, exactly. Yeah, I think you've nailed it. It's just I think they could have put a wet sponge up against Sunak and it would have won.
And then we need to look at the question of why. And I set a little bit more faith by polling than perhaps you do. Then we need to look at a question of why they flip so quickly, which is probably not a complicated question. The answer is because the disaster has been so complete. You can't cover up a collapsing pound, rocketing interest rates, renegotiated mortgages with catchphrases and karaoke. What can you cover up with catchphrases and karaoke? A lack of imagination, a lack of intelligence. What can't you cover up with catchphrases and karaoke? An economic disaster. You can't turn up as the pound is falling behind you and just say words like deliver in a slightly different order and hope that people will fall for it. You can get elected leader of the Conservative Party by doing that, but you cannot excuse yourself from responsibility. I mean, remember when Jacob Rees-Mogg tried to argue that the reaction to the mini-budget had nothing to do with the mini-budget? He's very quiet at the moment. I suppose we should be thankful for small mercies. Anthony's in Hales, Owen. Anthony, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller, slightly nervous as
most. You? I was in Kiddie at the weekend.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, awesome. Just in relation to the question, I think it's sort of following on slightly from Linton's point. I think that, as I just said to the producer, I think that basically they're just aware that simply that the time was up. So essentially what they've offered by way of both Liz Truss and subsequently Jeremy Hunt, Kwasi Kwarteng, everybody that sort of followed in, are essentially just fall guys. What they've done is they've tried to essentially increase as much as they possibly can, the benefits to their hedge fund donor pals, and in doing so, essentially basically they've played it quite well because they haven't lost on either count. So if it had have worked and the markets not have been as spooked as they had been, then obviously all would have been well. But now that they have been, and it seems that these people are sort of doomed to political failure, they were never likely to be a part of the future opposition anyway.
Well, the numbers were not. I mean, the Labour lead has gone. It's gone north in the last few weeks, hasn't it? I mean, there's been a slow move towards Labour, but the days of dreaming of a 20-point lead are way behind us now. We're looking at 30-point leads and more. So I don't know that the game was up when the leadership contest started, Anthony.
No, perhaps not at the time, but I think that what they'd intended to do was, obviously, after everything with Johnson and everything else and the illegal proroguing of Parliament, they needed sort of a sidestep from that, and essentially what better way than putting forward somebody with such ineptitude, because ultimately, like I said,
it's too much. It's a stretch too, for they've deliberately elected someone that they know is useless.
I'm not sure it's that point sort of that I'm putting, and perhaps I'm not putting it out there
try
very
again.
well. But
I'm sure it's my fault. I'm being slow on the uptake.
I think basically what I'm trying to say is that they've sort of put her forward in the hope that they've managed to sort of pull all of this off. Because obviously we've all been so, tremendously gaslit since Brexit that it would have been the case that perhaps quite the vast majority of us would have bought into this whole concept of the mini-budget and the trickle-down. They hadn't accounted for the markets taking the tailspin that they had.
Do you know what she did? She did it too soon.
Perhaps that's it, and they knew that. Obviously,
she could have used it. She could have done the karaoke and the catchphrases like a carrot dangled in front of the electorate and said, if we win the next election, or once we've got through this cost of living crisis, or once the energy prices have come back down again, then we're going to deliver the promised land. She should have treated her mini budget like Brexit, as in it's just around the corner. Any minute now, it's all going to be brilliant. But she went all in, didn't she? Straight away, and told the country that 3 melons were going to come up on the fruit machine of fiscal policy, and she got absolutely nothing.
I think that's pretty much it. Yeah,
I think you might be on. Yeah, you could. If she'd waited, they'd still be buying it, wouldn't they? And it would be just, what a shame that we can't. Oh boy, I'm glad we didn't come up with this before. There it is. If they'd waited, they could be saying to the people that put her in power, any minute now we're going to be able to do it. But obviously, flipping Vladimir Putin in Ukraine and those Remainers who are holding us back, and we just got to get through the energy crisis and then the cost of living crisis, and then we'll build a new Jerusalem. But she tried to build a new Jerusalem in the middle of it all, which is why Martin Lewis's analysis yesterday, that she might possibly have been able to get the energy bailout through or the tax cuts through, but to try to get both through at the same time without telling us where any of the money was going to come from was absolutely absurd. So why did she do that? Holly Harris is here now with the headlines. 26 minutes to 12. I think we're possibly overlooking the importance of that comment from James Heapy earlier today about the whole cabinet were in on this. No one raised a voice of disagreement or dissent when this so-called mini budget was punted. So that maybe Truss should do a bit more of that, trying to take everybody down with her. But I don't know. The question we're asking at the moment is, how did she get the job? And I'm going to do something that's probably in vain. This is almost certainly futile, but I've just checked with a couple of colleagues, and you may well correct me on this. There may be one or two out there. But nobody is currently getting calls from Liz Truss supporters. Is that right? Nobody, as far as we're aware. Not even, how can I put this politely? Not even colleagues who've been proven completely wrong about everything since 2016 are getting calls from Liz Truss supporters. The people who told you to vote for Brexit, to vote for Boris Johnson, that Theresa May was the new Iron Lady, that the High Court judges were your enemies, that people, decent Democratic MPs should be drummed out of the... But people who went along with all of the last 6 years of idiocy. No one's getting calls from Liz Truss supporters. I would like to speak to you if you are, and don't yank my chain. It has to be real. And I'll give Keith permission to dump me. Keith can turn me down if I'm aggressive or unkind to you, all right? So you, Keith, don't get ahead of yourself. This is a one-off. So Keith can keep an eye on my manners. I'd love to know how you're doing, how you're diddling. Why did you put her in power? And why are you still convinced that you did the right thing? Because the polling I referred to earlier has 4 out of 10 Conservative members. I mean, I focused on the fact that a majority now wish they'd put Sunak in there, but 40% still think that Truss was the right choice. Admittedly, you might only be comparing her to Sunak. That was the choice you were given after all. But even so, I mean, that means you think it would have been worse under Rishi Sunak. And I've got quite a powerful imagination. I don't know how it could have been worse under Rishi Sunak. I mean, unless he announced that he'd sold us to Russia and ran away over the horizon with pockets full of cash. How could it possibly be worse? So if you are a genuinely committed Liz Truss supporter, I would love to talk, and I'm even going to keep a couple of phone lines free on this one until 12 o'clock. So if you are so you must have voted for her. You need to be a Conservative Party member who voted for Liz Truss, and ne regret Rianne, all right? 0345 6060973. And if I get a little bit previous or I get a little bit fighty, Keith will cut me off. That's the promise, all right? And you can just talk uninterrupted, undiluted, unchallenged about why you were right to put Liz Truss into Downing Street, and you are not perturbed by the way things have gone, are going, or will go. Just make sure Joe Lycett doesn't ring in, all right? I don't want Joe Lycett coming on doing his comedy. I want a real Liz Truss supporter, a genuine Liz Truss supporter from within the ranks of the Conservative Party membership. 0345 6060 973. Mervyn's in Croydon. Mervyn, what happened? How did she get the gig?
Hi, James. It's just quite a simple thing that I'm putting forward.
Yeah.
My partner gets the Daily Mail.
Oh, yes.
And when there were three candidates going forward from what the MPs had chosen, one had to drop out. The Daily Mail ran a campaign for about 12 or 13 days, absolutely slating Penny Mordaunt, not the others, just Penny. Yeah, and it's my opinion that is why she never got selected to go forward.
You're right. I remember. In fact, I'm sure that I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the usual suspects, one of the absolute Brexiters, said something like, I'd never realised just how bad the right-wing media could be until they all attacked Penny Mordaunt. I mean, imagine that. Imagine that being the moment when you realised what the Daily Mail can do to a population or to an electorate. But it'll come to me at 1:05 who it was, Mervyn. But I remember one of them said, one of the sort of diehard Brexiters said that, I can't believe what they've done to Penny Mordaunt. That Daily Mail, that Daily Mail's got too much power. I'd never realised before, but they did. Yeah. And I don't know that meant they had a particular problem with Penny Mordaunt. They just needed Liz Truss to be in the final two, didn't they?
Absolutely. And, to conclude what I'm going to say simply is, getting Penny Mordaunt out of it, you got Truss and I forget the other guy's name. And
what, the ones in the last four?
No, in the last two, that the Conservative Party. Yeah.
Sunak.
And they just wanted it up between Truss and Sunak.
Yeah.
And they knew that Truss would win that. And whatever the Daily Mail underlying reason was, that's why they attacked Penny Mordaunt.
Yeah, you're right. They just needed Trump. And why did they want Truss in the final battle, knowing that she'd win? Answer, because they believed she'd do exactly what she did. And that's what set fire to the pound. And there they are now. Guess what their front page... Do you want to have a guess at what their front page is today? Have you seen your partner's copy of the paper yet today, Mervyn?
I've bought it, but I concentrated on the Times.
Quite right, too. Truss finally says sorry for errors in painful TV mea culpa, but they weren't errors. It was finally the first Conservative budget in years. She's reduced to spectator as Hunt tears up her mini budget, but it wasn't her mini budget. It was the best budget these people had seen in generations. And the big headline, no in office, but not in power, as she issued a grovelling apology for blunders on the economy. They don't mention, Mervyn, that the blunders on the economy she issued a grovelling apology for were being cheered to the rafters by the Daily Mail just 4 weeks ago. I think that's a big part of it. How did she win? The Daily Mail got rid of Penny Mordaunt. I can't remember who it was. Who was it? Seriously. So I can't believe what the Daily Mail have done to Penny Mordaunt. I've never believed that they do. I can't. It'll come to me in a minute. It's probably Andrew Bridgen, was it, or someone like that? Sarah's in Putney. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Are you the Liz Truss supporter? Are you the Liz Truss supporter?
Sorry, no. I'm not even a Conservative Party member. Sorry.
Outrageous. You're one of those anti-growth coalitioners, you are, aren't you?
Yeah,
I can tell.
I think I probably am.
Got you a mile off. How did she get the gig, Sarah?
Well, I think there are lots of things behind it, but one way of looking at it is it's a bit like the referendum in microcosm. So Liz Truss promised sunlit uplands and unicorns, and Rishi Sunak was actually Project Fear.
Yeah.
And because the
Gloomster. They called him a Gloomster, didn't they? Gloomster.
Yeah. So the Tory party membership is probably quite UKIP-y, and they went for it again. So the penny maybe now has dropped. I don't know.
Because low tax...
Yeah.
I mean, you don't even need high growth. Just telling them that they were going to pay less tax, it would have been enough to get them over the line. We'll cut your taxes. I'm going to vote for you. We'll cut your taxes. I'm going to vote for you.
Simple answers to complex problems.
Yeah. How are you going to pay for those tax cuts? Don't ask me those questions. You that's the anti-growth coalition, that is, asking those. Yeah. I am going to promise tax cuts, and you are going to vote for me, and we don't need to go into fourth gear or fifth gear. Yeah. That's the end of the conversation. That's the beginning, the middle, and the end of the conversation.
Yeah. And your earlier caller was probably quite right to say that it was too quick.
Yeah. Actually, that was me that said that, but only in response to the quality contribution from the earlier caller. It was sort of the penny, the coins that dropped out at the bottom of the machine while he was talking made me realise that if she'd waited, if she'd done sunlit uplands rather than, right, we're doing it today, she might just have got away with it.
Yeah.
That's definitely. I mean, that is it. I mean, we do it all the time on this program. Oh, how can that happen? Oh, how can that happen? The answer is simple. Why do you think tabloid newspapers sell more than broadsheets? Why do you think the queue for the ghost train is longer than the queue for the speak your weight machine? We like simple sugar rushes. I'm going to cut your taxes. Oh, great. I'm not going to ask how, because great, you're going to cut our taxes. And then Rishi Sunak is standing there going, no, you can't do that, because if you do that, then X squared on the Y-axis, and I'm going to go, he's too clever by half, says Linton's mate in Dorset. See, a few of you suggesting that was actually racist. I don't think it was, but I am a white man and I don't know. So too clever by half for a brown man, too clever by half for an Asian man. A few texts came in, otherwise I wouldn't mention it. I didn't hear that or see that myself, but I am not on the right side of that story to have a definitive or a compelling opinion. Thank you, Sarah. From Putney to Southgate. John, what happened?
I think everybody's overcomplicated it.
Wouldn't be the first
It's just
time.
very simple.
Yeah.
No, okay. But your previous caller that you just had on now, I'm kind of in agreement with that.
Yeah.
She just promised greedy, selfish people that they were going to be made wealthier.
Even richer. And there it is.
Why wouldn't they vote for her? And I'm just talking about I can't tell you why she got to the position where she was challenging Rishi Sunak for it, but we're talking about the people that have regretted voting for her. They've regretted voting for her because she's affected their pensions.
So they haven't got richer.
No. And I think there is some racism involved in this, and I agree with your texters. I've been part of an African family for 32 years, so although I'm not myself a black or a brown person, I am from an ethnic minority. I can't tell you that I agree with those texters who were saying, who does this brown-skinned man think he is?
Really? You think too clever by half? Too clever by half is code, as it were.
It is code. You've got to read between the lines.
No,
You've got to read between the lines. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I was just going to say I'm happy to hear that. I mean, well, not happy to hear it, but I'm happy to let that stand as your view, your lesson to me. You might be right. We'll never know unless we're there in the pub with Linton.
Of course, but I think that when it comes to being greedy and selfish, your self-interest trumps your racism. So these people now would think, well, if he was going to be if she's making me poorer, and he wouldn't have made me poorer, I'd rather have had him, even though I'm racist.
I think that is very much of a piece with some of the political movements in this country at the moment. That idea of I will overcome my racism because you're even more right wing than your white colleagues are. So therefore, I will go along with this. And yet, I mean, there it is. That simple promise. I will promise to cut your taxes. Read my lips. No more taxes. I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's a little unkind just to say that they're rich, greedy people, rich, greedy, self-interested people, but the size of the constituency is such a small electorate. That means that rich, greedy, self-interested people who loved the promise of lower taxes without bothering to work out whether or not it was vaguely feasible that they could be delivered are the reason why Liz Truss is in Downing Street. 11:49 is the time. A complete change of pace now because it is the 50th anniversary this year of one of my